And as mentioned, here's that man from On Three and many other places, Andy Staples, good friend, gifted reporter, columnist, personality, YouTube channel, podcaster, all the things. How you doing, man?
Just trying to be as multi-talented and versatile as you, Yogi. That's all I'm doing. I can't throw, though. That's the problem.
Can you catch?
A little bit, but they made me block. I was a lineman. They didn't let me touch the ball, not even to snap it, because I almost broke a quarterback's fingers. But that's a story for another day.
All right. Well, you were probably like living vicariously through like Janoris Williams and Josh Connerly this past weekend with the Oregon
Yes, Josh Connerly. That looked like so much fun. Every time somebody does that, Bielema used to do that all the time at Arkansas. He hasn't done it as much at Illinois, but every time somebody draws something like that up, I'm like, thank you. Love it. Yeah. And I also like when the O-line coaches hit it big. Now, Bielema was a D-line coach, but like Brent Key, former O-line coach, beats Miami this weekend. Like, that's huge. Yeah, huge for the brand.
I love that. Yeah, great call. Janoris Wilson, give him about a ton of love. I was around at OC and Coach Grimes this weekend.
Jeff Grimes is
O-line guy as well. So you're right. I love giving the O-line guy some love.
Trivia question for you, Yogi.
Oh, boy. Okay.
This probably came up in your conversation with Jeff Grimes. Who was his offensive line coach?
Oh, yeah. I got it already. Yeah, we already talked. We talked about it in the game.
You were in a stadium.
It was all over it. That's right. Andy Reid. They text back and forth, stealing plays, but giving credit. So that was really fun as KU was rolling. Take me through your weekend. I was in Arrowhead. What was your experience? Because I believe you were at a pretty compelling game.
I was. It's weird because I've had a bad string of games that I've gone to in person this year where they've all been kind of blowouts. This one actually, if we really boil it down, was a blowout, but it was an interesting blowout because it was not the direction we expected the blowout to go. So I was in Oxford for Georgia Ole Miss. Ole Miss could potentially be eliminated from the college football playoff. Georgia could keep rolling. Instead, Ole Miss stays alive, knocks Georgia into an elimination game this weekend against Tennessee. And I tell you what, Yogi, that Ole Miss team, it's a top 5 roster. They've lost to Kentucky. They lost to LSU. And watching them play against Georgia on Saturday, you're like, how in the hell did that happen? Because if that team plays the way it is capable of playing, it can beat everyone, every single team out there. And I think that's sort of Ole Miss's issue, is that they're somewhat inconsistent. But when they turn it on, holy crap, because, we're so used to seeing Georgia be dominant and have a better roster than everybody they play. Ole Miss was better than Georgia. It wasn't really debatable at all.
Okay, so take me through this, because I think this is a fun conversation. Here we are in this expanded playoff world with realignment also right in front of us in this world. So some teams aren't facing the teams they traditionally play. Some teams are facing brand new teams. Everybody's road is a little bit different. So where do you net out at, as you referenced, a top 4, top 5 roster versus the body of work? And I'd imagine you have a take on how that will be debated in the coming Sundays and Mondays as we see the rankings every Tuesday.
I think you can have as good a roster as you want, but you got to show it on the field. Ole Miss's loss to Kentucky is suspect. The fact that they would show up and lay an egg against an inferior team like that is something you have to take into account. And as long as they don't lose another game, I think they're fine, but they need to be careful. If they only have 2 games left, they play at Florida and they play Mississippi State. There's no excuse for them to lose either one of those games. If they lose one of those games, they deserve to not make the playoff because of that. But the thing is, if they win them, now if I'm Ohio State and I see them, I'm scared, because that's a roster that can compete with what Ohio State put together. That's a roster that can compete with what Oregon put together. And I think that's a lot of fun. And I'll tell you what, the expanded conferences, Yogi, the thing that I keep thinking about is matchups I want to see in conference. I feel like we need a play-in game between Penn State and Indiana. I'm tired of comparing them obliquely, and their Big Ten schedules barely match up. I don't feel like I know what they are head to head. The other matchup I'd like to see, just because I think it would be the most fun game, is this version of South Carolina that they've evolved into against Texas. Because you saw Texas against a really good pass rush with Georgia, and they fell apart. South Carolina doesn't do everything great, but they do the pass rush. They're one of the best in the country. They're amazing at that. So I'd love to see Quinn Ewers dealing with Kennard and Stewart coming off the edge. that we're not going to see that matchup because South Carolina's already got 3 losses, so they can't make the SEC championship game. They're not going to make the playoff. But like, I'd give anything to see that game.
Yeah. Where do you net out? Like, let's just say Indiana loses to Ohio State, beats Purdue, but they're not going to play in the Big Ten title game. And here you go at Ole Miss. Let's say they're not going to play in their championship game, but they have multiple losses. And you're comping 2 teams dramatically far apart regionally, but also you reference like the rosters and the talent. But then I net out on like the consistency on the playing field and what Indiana has done. I'd be curious for you because you're in a different region than we are on the West Coast. I've been in the Midwest pretty much the majority of the season, and you're in the South.
I can't imagine an 11-1 Penn State being left out unless they just get beat 56-0 by Ohio State. As long as they're competitive in that game, I don't see how you can leave them out. Especially if they are very competitive in that game. Because, I mean, shoot, Penn State's buoyed by a close loss to Ohio State. But the problem with Penn State and Indiana is you play the who have you beaten game and it gets a little bit tough.
Yeah.
Now, Ole Miss can say we beat Georgia. Now, what if Georgia loses to Tennessee? How big is that win? Now, I will say that South Carolina team I was talking about that I love so much, Ole Miss beat them 27-3 on the road. So that's probably a good win. But you're going to get that. And the thing is, like the SEC, I don't think you can assume that just because they play in the SEC, they're good. I think we'll see in the NFL draft that they're probably more talented than the other leagues. I think the draft will bear that out. But that doesn't necessarily mean their teams are automatically better. And so I think that's what we got to be careful of because like the SEC doesn't have a lot of like signature non-conference wins this season. We were trying to figure out what the best one was on my show, and me and Ari Wasserman, I think we agreed it was Georgia beating Clemson, which is not that great.
Right.
I think South Carolina may beat Clemson too.
Is somebody playing Mercer this week? Isn't that a big time now?
Alabama's playing Mercer.
Yeah, let me get out of here with that.
At least South Carolina's got the Citadel coming up next week. Yeah. So, we'll get to see against the cream of the crop in the FCS.
Yeah. Okay. Another big picture thought for you, because you just have such a great lens on the country. And here I am coming from college football through the lens of the West Coast. I'm curious where you net out when it comes to bids to the playoff among the ACC, the Big 12, and, it's not like, to your point, anyone in the SEC has been traditionally dominant like a Georgia had been or like a Bama had been, et cetera. The Big 10, Oregon is clearly, to me, has been that team. We'll see about, I don't know how you feel about everybody else, but I wonder what you think. Like, should those 2 super leagues be getting dramatically more berths? Like, should the loser of the Big 12 and ACC title game not get in based on?
I think Miami losing to Georgia Tech made the ACC a 1-bid league. Because I think there was a path to Miami going 12-0, SMU going into that game 11-1, and undefeated in ACC play with their only loss to BYU, who may or may not be the Big 12 champ when all is said and done. And let's say SMU beat Miami in a really nice game, then I think you'd have them both in. I think they would both get in. But now that Miami's lost, I think it becomes an elimination game. I think it's a winner-take-all situation. And the Big 12 is going to be winner-take-all. The Big 12's actually got to be careful. Like, they gotta make sure they don't lose, like, the teams that make the title game don't lose a couple more. Because that conference has a good chance to eat itself as the season goes on. Because remember, if Boise State wins out, what if Army wins out? Like, what if Army beats Notre Dame, wins the American, goes undefeated? Remember, it is not the 4 power conference champs get the top 4 seeds and get an automatic bye. It is the top 4 ranked conference champs. And remember, it's not the 4 power conference champs automatically get into the playoff. It is the top 5 ranked conference champs. So you got to be careful here. You got to stay ahead, like get ahead of Boise State and Army and stay ahead if you're those teams. Now, I think BYU keeps winning, or even if they drop one, Colorado keeps winning. I think that, that champion is going to be in the playoff probably as the 4 seed, but it is something to consider. And look, if Boise State keeps winning, they could be 12-1. And the one time they got to play a superpower is against what might be the number 1 seed in the whole playoff, Oregon, on the road. And they were in a 1-possession game at the end of the 4th quarter. I mean, so I think it's a really intriguing situation with those leagues, because I'm not assuming the power conference champs are going to be the top four.
I love that. Somewhere our producer, Jim Thornby, is smiling because he's had to remind so many people of the thing that you just referenced. To that point, you're in Gainesville. Let's talk about Pullman. Like, what's your thought on what Jake Dickert has done amid no fault of their own, of course, with realignment and or scheduling? And they come out this past week and absolutely roll Utah State. Will eventually be in the Pac-12 in about a year and a half. And I'm kind of curious because they're one of those like hanging in the weeds teams. I know the CFP is a challenge potentially for them, but they've won.
They have. It would have been great for them if Texas Tech had just blown through the Big 12.
Yeah,
that would have been really helpful. The loss to Boise State and the way they lost to Boise State is probably going to keep them, from having a chance. And if they were in what they're going to be in the future, a conference with the requisite number of teams, then they would have a really good shot, because they would be potentially a conference champ that could be the highest ranked, group of, what are we going to call it? Group of six. I don't know what we're going to call it, but they'd be the highest ranked of that bunch potentially. Now, I think in this particular case, because Boise State beat them head to head, Boise State's going to get that nod. But I think Jay Dickert has done a fabulous job. And the way the coaching market is moving, I think Washington State may have a chance to keep him another year. Because unless he wants to go take a coordinator job somewhere, I'm not sure there's a better place to go. And I think that was because you saw it with Oregon State, Jonathan Smith just moving immediately as soon as he knew what was going to happen. Jake Dickert, I think they got him. And then you get into the conference and a more normal conference situation. And I think you're feeling pretty good about that.
Well, I think if you take out, you look at all the teams that had left the former Pac-12 as we knew it and loved it, Washington State 5 years from now, will they be at more playoff games than the majority of the teams that left? I'd say yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think that would be because, Oregon is going to be in the mix. I think Washington will. They're in a rebuilding mode this year. But, yeah, everybody else is going to be fighting tooth and nail. Now, I'm not sure anybody had Colorado going to the playoff this year, even in the season, like after they lost to Nebraska. But they look like, so they might be the first Pac-12 refugee in the Big 12 to go to the CFP, because I actually think they're playing better than everybody in the Big 12. I think they have more top end talent than everybody in the Big 12. The thing Deion did, and he tried to warn us about this at media days. He's like, that D line's nasty. Some of those transfers we got, BJ Green, Ogunlola, Deion Hayes, like some of those dudes. Deion Hayes, a Pitt guy. Pitt guy transferred west. Story, tale as old as time. But they're really, like, the edge guys are really good. And then you add in Shedeur Sanders and you add in Travis Hunter. And I'm excited to see them down the stretch, because they got the Utah team that looked much better when they changed quarterbacks to Brandon Rose. Now, that may have been just because it was the rivalry game, biggest crowd in the history of Rice-Eccles Stadium. But I'm excited. That's a brunch game this week. They're playing 10 a.m. local.
I love it. We'll be all over that one here. All right, last two before I let you go. You referenced Travis Hunter. I know you track college football as well as anybody, and especially the Heisman. Like, how are you navigating your mind around the greatest award in at least what we still call amateur sports?
This one's an interesting year, because I think any other year it would be super easy, because what Ashton Genty's doing is beyond what we've seen most running backs do in the past 20, 30 years. What Travis Hunter is doing is something we haven't seen in our lifetimes, unless you're really, really old. They brought back the 2-platoon system in 1965. But if you think back to when they still had the 1-platoon system, who was that good on both sides of the ball in the 1940s and the 1950s? I think, Notre Dame had a guy named Leon Hart who won the Heisman Trophy, I believe, in the 40s, and was really great on both sides of the ball. But Travis Hunter's doing something that we've never seen before, and I don't think we will ever see it again. And I think that's the part, like, people get so wrapped up in stats that they understand. It's so hard to explain to somebody who doesn't actually know football. Like, when you have a corner who has no defensive stats, who played every snap of the game on the other team's best receiver, that guy played a great game because they didn't throw at their best receiver. You erased their best receiver, and they were too scared to even throw. Like this past game, the only time they targeted the receiver that Travis Hunter was covering was on a free play where Colorado had jumped offside. Do you remember what happened at the end of that play? He made a leaping interception. That didn't count because it was a free play. That's right. But that's the only time they even targeted him.
Yeah, he's a special player. I think what's so amazing about the award to me is I always go to the definition, like the most outstanding player in college football who exhibits excellence with integrity. So there's like a lot that goes into the definition, whether people even know the definition or not. Is to me, 900 plus voters is a little ludicrous. And if you vote before championship games, I think you should be revoked. So here we are, we're talking about a running back. You said 20, 30 years. Christian McCaffrey, to me, was robbed of the Heisman to a large degree based on voters voting prior to a record-setting Pac-12 championship game at the time. Here we go with another record-setting running back. You have a dominant two-way player, to your point. And then you got a guy who's going to continue to just break records to me in Dylan Gabriel. I mean, 180 total touchdowns in his career.
So Dylan Gabriel and Cam Ward are playing amazing. I think Jalen Milroe probably put his name back in the hat with that performance against LSU. But I'm interested because before the season started, if you'd have told me Travis Hunter will be everything he can possibly be, I would have said, that's awesome. I will probably be voting him first if he does that, but I'm not sure who else will. I actually think he might win it. Wow. And that is good to me. Like the first year I voted was 2009. My first place vote was Ndamukong Suh. He was the best player in the country. It was not close. Like, Mark Ingram won the award. He was not the best player in Tuscaloosa County, much less the best player in America that season. So, no offense to Mark Ingram, but I think most of that team would say Rolando McClain was the best player on Alabama's team that year. So, he was my number 2 on that ballot. But I didn't have faith in most voters to get beyond the quarterback, running back, receiver thing. I think they're understanding how special the Travis Hunter thing is. But the problem is the Ashton Genty thing is so special too. And it's going to feel awful that one of them isn't going to be able to win it.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Heck, I didn't even put Tyler Warren. He's on my short list now too.
He's so good.
Penn State. All right, real quick before we cut you loose here. Out here in LA, I want your perspective. Miller Moss, Heisman candidate. You could argue front runner after week 1 and they take down LSU in Las Vegas. Here come the Trojans. To me, it's not like doesn't fall on the shoulders of him. Lincoln Riley, I think, would agree with that, but they make a change. And then on the other side of town, or at least a few miles away, here comes UCLA and DeShaun Foster after a gauntlet. They come and shut down Iowa, and they got a shot in their next 3 games to win out. I'm curious your take on LA from Florida.
So I was at Big Ten Media Days when DeShaun Foster froze up on the stage. And I remember saying, okay, I got to talk to him because I do want to hear what he actually has to say. Because this is the only thing anybody's going to, like, what happened when he was on the big stage was the only thing anybody was going to talk about. So, we grabbed and pulled him aside and recorded an interview for my show. And I came away so impressed with his plan for UCLA because, as good of a coach as Chip Kelly is, he was not recruiting in the way that you need to recruit to be successful at UCLA. Like Jim Moore Jr. actually recruited the way you're supposed to make UCLA good. He just didn't quite put it all together. But they should be in on lots of really good LA County, Orange County, San Diego County talent. And then they can you can also recruit nationally because you're in freaking Westwood. Like, come live Beverly Hills adjacent and play big time college football. And DeShaun Foster understands that. Now, what I think is so incredible about what they're doing right now is they could have bagged this season. They were 1-5. And those games were frustrating. They couldn't run the ball. Nothing was working. And then all of a sudden, you start seeing progress. And they go to Rutgers and win. and they go to Nebraska and win, and they play Iowa, and they weren't able to move the ball on the ground, and all of a sudden they are mauling Iowa up front. I mean, you think about it, Yogi. Garbers threw a couple picks early in that game. You take those away, that is a straight up blowout. They dominated Iowa's defense on the ground. And I'm looking at Washington and going, you know what? Most teams have been able to run on Washington. So is UCLA finding its identity? Because if it is, this could be exciting. Because remember, Eric Bieniemy, first year as a college offensive coordinator. He's been in the NFL all these years. So this is new to him too. New to DeShaun Foster as the head coach. I'm very excited to see that because as you mentioned, they could win out. Like they could beat Washington, USC, and Fresno State. And they win 2 of those, they're in a bowl game, which is huge. Now, USC, I think a lot of it is they're somewhat snake bit this season, kind of like Nebraska over the years, where whatever can go wrong will go wrong. At least that's how it feels. I remember watching that Washington game, and they're right on the goal line. I'm like, well, they're finally going to punch this in. They're going to be fine. And like one defender is unblocked, and I have not seen a running back get hit and fall backward like that in my life on the goal line. And I was like, this team is cursed. Now, maybe the quarterback change will help, but my thing, Yogi, with Lincoln Riley is I trust him completely with quarterbacks, and the fact that he had not made that move to Jaden Mayava earlier suggests to me that this is not a Spencer Rattler, Caleb Williams situation like he had at Oklahoma, where he put Caleb in the middle of the Texas game, but then it was blindingly obvious that Caleb was the better quarterback. I'm not sure that's the case. This feels like I got to get some juice going because we got to figure out how to get this thing bowl eligible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, man, we kept you long enough. I love talking to you. I love your work. Continue to track Andy Staples. We'll make sure all of the links to his socials and all of his shows and his content are in our show notes, as well as all the other good stuff at yoption.com. Andy, thank you so much, and congrats on everything, man. You've inspired us a ton as you took a different leap a couple years ago, so thank you for all the support along the way as well.
Oh, my pleasure, Yogi, and I love this show, and keep doing. I like seeing you all over the place now. Like it made me smile when I saw you at the Kansas game. I'm like, okay, now the rest of the world is getting Yogi in their ears, and that is a beautiful thing. So,
well, you sent me a note last year after we called the Notre Dame Stanford game that was really meaningful, man. So you've always been supportive and just a good friend, and I just appreciate you.
No problem, Yogi. Thank you so much, and we are going to do a home and home here in a few weeks. So be prepared.
We'll talk about it all, baby. There it is. Andy Staples. See ya.